Hello and welcome to another edition of AI Impact Talk with me, Thembekile Mrototo. Now, we've been talking about artificial intelligence in South Africa for quite a while now, but very few people have documented South Africa's journey and what the world is doing in terms of AI, as well as our guest today. He is the founder of Worldwide Worx. He's also the editor of Gadget magazine and the author of 20 books, including the latest one, which focuses, in fact, on artificial intelligence. Who am I talking about? Well, none other than Arthur Goldstuck, who's with me on AI Impact Talk today. Arthur, a very good afternoon to you. Welcome.
Great to be with you, Thembekile.
So I talked about the book, right? And we'll get to the book in a moment because it's doing the rounds. Everyone is talking about what you've been able to put into all of this. I want us to unpack it in detail. But before we get there, talk to me about AI and South Africa. What is the landscape in the country currently?
There are multiple landscapes, funnily enough. So AI is not one thing. Everyone thinks AI is this chat GPT thing that everyone can now use to create content, or DALL-E or image creator that you can now invent your own artwork, for example. But it goes back a long way before that, and it's been used in many ways in South Africa and globally, of course, long before that. So I call the book The Hitchhiker's Guide to AI because I really hitchhiked around the world on the back of tech companies that invited me to attend their events, launches, conferences, and also just to see what they were doing with AI. And initially, it wasn't talking about AI. It was talking about, look at these incredible things we can do with data. And the idea of using AI almost as a marketing tool started with ChatGPT, because suddenly the whole world woke up to AI and generative AI, or what they now call Gen AI. But before that, companies were using AI and almost embarrassed to say they were using AI. But there were a few exceptions, and one of my favorite is a local insurance company that launched in 2018 as an AI-based insurance company. So Naked Insurance suddenly appeared as South Africa's first AI-based insurance company, and possibly one of the world's first, where they used AI to onboard people in the beginning, to help them manage their insurance while they were customers. So, for example, it was the first insurance company in South Africa where you could pause your insurance or tone it down. For example, if you were going to lock your car in a garage in a secure estate, for example, and you were going to go away and it wasn't going to be on the roads, then you wanted to pay less insurance. And they were the first to allow that using AI. And then once you make your claim as well, and they assess your claim and they pay out your claim, all using AI. So that was a world-leading example going back to 2018 already.
But I like what you said right at the beginning, right, about the perceptions or perhaps misconceptions around what is AI, because when most of us who aren't in the space talk about it, we do reduce it to conversations around ChatGPT because that's what's trending online, but it's a much broader space. How broad is it?
It's so broad that it has already revolutionized agriculture across the African continent, and I'll give you some of my favorite examples of that. It's in the process of revolutionizing healthcare, and in certain limited areas it already has. We just haven't been exposed to it, but we will be. And education is slowly being revolutionized by AI. So let's look at agriculture, because that's the most down-to-earth use of AI,
especially with us,
so to speak.
Because we do a lot of agriculture in South Africa.
Exactly. We depend on it. So one of the great case studies for me was actually discovered not in South Africa, but in California, where I went to a conference hosted by Intel Capital, which is Intel's investment fund into startups and so on. And one of the showcased companies was a company using drones to take a high-definition video footage of crops and analyze those crops using AI. And I came back here and I thought, that's a fantastic use case for South Africa, dependent as we are on agriculture. So I went to see if anyone was using this company's technology only to discover that there was a South African startup that was already at the cutting edge of exactly that technology. And in Cape Town, I discovered a company called Aerobotics, Aerobotics. Great name. But they use drones to do high-definition video footage of orchards in the Western and Southern Cape, especially the apple orchards.
Right.
And then they used AI to analyze the video footage. Using AI software, they could then assess the health of the orchards down to each individual tree, not just the overall orchard. They could
Which is
tell,
something that would have been quite labor intensive, right?
Very
Without
much
this technology.
so. It's something that would normally take weeks, now took hours, and eventually it'll take minutes. And this then can be extrapolated to any crops, any kind of farming. It was revolutionary for agriculture. I discovered it existed by attending a conference in California, but discovered that it was being used at the cutting edge in Cape Town using homegrown technology.
Brings me to my next question. When we talk about AI, we think of developments in America, maybe Asia. Where are we as a country in terms of AI and innovation? Are we among the leaders or still following?
So that specific case study woke me up to the fact that in very specific areas, we were among the world leaders. And then when Naked came along with AI insurance as one of the first in the world, it again struck me and solidified in me the idea that in very specific use cases, we are world leaders, even in something as cutting edge as AI. So not in the large language models that make ChatGPT possible and Google Gemini and Microsoft Copilot. There you need massive investment. You really need the tens of billions of dollars that have been spent on those projects. But then you come back to South Africa and you ask, what about local language, large language models? And here we discover an outfit called Lalapa operating from Johannesburg, lalapa.ai. And they are developing large language models in local languages. So far, 4 South African languages have been included. Their ambition is to include all sub-Saharan African languages eventually. So obviously they will use the learnings that come from the global experiments. You don't try to reinvent a wheel by trying to invent rubber.
So you watch global trends, you look at what's out there, and you adapt it to our context, basically.
Yeah, and if you look at how research works, academic research in particular, when someone wants to create new knowledge or develop new understanding, they build it on what went before. So if you, for example, do a master's degree thesis or a doctorate, a thesis for a doctorate degree, you have to do a literature review that shows what went before, and you have to build it on top of that to show that you've created new understanding if you're doing a master's, and then to show you've created new knowledge if you do a PhD. But all of that is based on what went before. And it doesn't matter where it came from. It can be from anywhere in the world. And that's what we're seeing in AI in South Africa and across Africa, that we're building on what went before, regardless of where it came from. And I just want to emphasize again the concept of large language models, which tend to be talked about only when people mention ChatGPT or Google Gemini or Microsoft Copilot. In France, there's a large language model called Mistral.
Oh, okay. What does that do?
It's pretty much what all the others do. It's a combination, you could say, of ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot. But essentially, it's also to generate new content out of existing content. So that's what a large language model does. It aggregates or puts together content from numerous sources, but a massive amount of content, and then trains the AI to generate new content out of that. So that's Mistral in France. Now we go to China. In China, there are 40 large language models that have been approved by the Chinese government for use by the public and by companies.
And how long have they had them? Because it feels very new to the rest of us.
It's very new. The whole idea of large language models really started with ChatGPT, although it came before ChatGPT. When they spoke about large language models, they were first talking about it theoretically for some years, and then prior to ChatGPT emerging, they began talking about GPTs, which are essentially transformers. They transform existing content into new content. And there were people analyzing transformers already before that. And then suddenly ChatGPT emerged as the first public-facing transformer. And that set the whole world alight. And that led to the Chinese accelerating their research in this area. And now you have 40 Chinese large language models that none of us have heard of.
We all talk about innovation, but in South Africa, we desperately need it because we're constantly in pursuit of the next thing to assist, especially economically. We're trying to get as many people into employment as possible. When you look at the AI space, where are the opportunities for the country and especially the creative people in the space? Where should we be looking? What should we be doing, especially in the hope of creating employment?
It's a fantastic question because it addresses one of the key themes in the book, and that is looking at the difference between innovation in Silicon Valley and in across Africa, but in South Africa specifically. The fundamental difference when you look at all the innovation that's happening is that in Silicon Valley, it's based on opportunity. In other words, a gap in the market. Someone spots a gap in the market. Let's fill that gap and we can make a fortune. And my favorite example of that is Uber. So it was a bunch of developers in San Francisco, in Silicon Valley, who said, what if we created an app that allowed people to call?
You could hail a taxi basically from your phone.
Yeah, basically. But what we do is we get people to sign on as drivers. So we bypass the taxi industry. Imagine how many more people we can get on the roads, ferrying other people around. Great gap in the market. Why didn't we think of that? And of course, then a lot of other people thought of different ways of doing it, and competitors emerged, but they were the first. And they, because of being first, they were able to try things, break things, and fix things and make them better.
They set a standard, right?
Yeah, but that was a gap in the market. It wasn't a need in the market. There were taxis. People had cars, but there was an opportunity to make it better. In South Africa, the fundamental difference is innovation is based on need, not on opportunity.
And does that hamstring us in terms of creativity and innovation?
No, what it means is that we don't have to worry about catching up with Silicon Valley or competing with Silicon Valley. We can address our own opportunities that are created by need. And when I say need, I'm not just talking about I need a hamburger delivered to me without having to go to the restaurant. That is a need, but that's an opportunity. And that's an example of innovation that, again, came from elsewhere. Uber Eats, Mr. D,
I'm thinking of
etc.
South Africa, if you look at pressing needs, water, electricity, safety and security, and what could be done there.
Exactly. So in a range of areas, South Africans identified needs that had to be met. So in agriculture, the need is to improve food security, productivity on farms, and also the ability of farmers to get to market most efficiently. And we saw that already long before in East and West Africa. So one of my favorite case studies in West Africa is from Senegal, which was the first country where we saw smartphones being used to allow farmers to access market prices live on the day based on what they were able to bring to market, to assess whether it was viable for them to make that big track from their farm or their plot or their small holding to the marketplace to go and sell whatever they had produced on their patch of land. And that enabled the farmers there to become far more efficient, far less wasteful of their own resources, and therefore not just save money by not going to market when it wasn't viable, but make money by going to market when it's more viable. Fantastic use case, using smartphones and using basic software, but also using a form of AI. Machine learning is a form of AI that uses algorithms that allow you to assess very basic information and feed out data from that information.
So the opportunities are endless. What I'm also hearing from you, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Arthur, is that the technology doesn't necessarily have to be complicated, because everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people are intimidated because the assumption is that you need to come up with this really intricate, complicated thing. But as you were saying, you've got, for example, need, you've got what people want, but also necessity, right?
Exactly.
And convenience.
Yeah. So I think we're going to see dramatic shifts in the way the taxi industry operates in the coming years, because sooner or later, the taxi associations and the taxi owners are going to realize that by using smart technology, and they operate smarter, they'll be able to improve their margins. For example, that's one example where it's a need. It's not a market opportunity. It's a real need that exists out there. In healthcare, for example, we are seeing numerous cases or numerous examples, rather, of where researchers are developing tools that allow you, for example, to do a TB assessment on site and get lab results back almost not instantly, but within hours as opposed to weeks, which or days.
Yeah, because when you look at healthcare in South Africa, people are trying to do things such as that, or trying to improve dispensing of medication, for example, because we know the queues take long, especially if you're going to a public facility. But even the big pharmacies in the retail stores are having to be innovative in order to make it faster, more convenient for people.
Yeah, there's a great pharmacy in Johannesburg that uses robots to collect the medicines. Now, if you go into the medicine area, there's thousands and thousands of boxes of medicine, and it can take the assistant in the front of the store, if it's not the pharmacist who knows exactly where everything has been put, it can take that person quite a long time. It can take them half an hour to find it, and they can only serve one customer in that time. And the other customers are queuing up. Punches in what it wants, and a robot arm essentially fetches it, drops it into a basket, and pushes it out to the pharmacist or the assistant. And instead of it taking half an hour, it takes 90 seconds.
So you're good at predicting trends. How soon before we have a robot that can get me to the gym, work out on my behalf, make sure that I'm healthy, and take me back home?
You can have it if you've got $1 billion to spare.
Is that called plastic surgery? Let's talk about.
No, you can. You really can get robots to do that
to work out on my behalf.
Well, to pretend that you're working out. But you have in Japan, there's a massive industry of robot carers. In other words, robots designed to care for the elderly and the infirm, and that's because there's a huge shortage there of a nursing staff, of humans to do the nursing or the frail care, whatever the case might be, because they have a massive aging population and a great shortage of people who can care for that aging population. The answer there is robots. Again, it's addressing a need, but that does mean that the research going into those robots makes it feasible for them to become more consumer-facing in the long term, or more accessible to ordinary people. The difference, though, is that that's an incredibly expensive solution for an individual. An institution can invest in it. So a big pharmacy chain can invest, a big hospital group can invest in that technology. So, for example, here in Pretoria, they're using robots to do surgery in specific areas like urology, for example. They have robot surgeons assisting the surgeon.
Right here up the highway.
Up the highway. And there are quite a few examples across South Africa of robots being used to assist in surgery, which makes the surgery far more accurate. But those, again, are incredibly expensive solutions. So you and I are not going to be using robots to do routine stuff for us. It just doesn't make sense financially. You may be, because I think you're doing pretty well out here.
I should increase my invoice for this.
Definitely.
I want to circle back to the book, Arthur, because one of the things, I think when I spoke to you a few months ago at the beginning of the year, when you were talking about the book, you were saying it's the sort of book that is perfect for a beginner, someone who's completely green on what AI is and how to follow up or read up on the space or even innovate, right? But also it's for people who are already experienced and in the space. So when I pick this up, AI, the Hitchhiker's Guide to AI, as you say, where should I start? Right at the beginning? And how do you then take all of this knowledge, all of this information, and cater for that broad spectrum of readers?
So there are three things I want you to read before you read the rest of the book. The first is right in the beginning, there's a section on how to read this book. Not because you don't know how to read, but because it gives you a guide to icons that are used throughout the book that tells you whether it's technical, and therefore if you don't want technical stuff, then avoid that. Whether it's for business, if you're not interested, don't read it. If you're only interested in the arts.
I see here.
If it's of consumer interest, then and you only want to read stuff that's aimed at consumers, then it's got those icons as well. The ideal is that you read the whole book, but there are certain sections that won't appeal to you and that you won't relate to. But
because we're at different levels, right?
Yeah,
and have
different levels
interests.
and different interests, exactly. The second thing I want you to read is the preface by Dr. Benjamin Rosman. He's the professor of AI at Wits University. And he puts it in context, why it's so significant what's happening now, but also what it makes possible in terms of solving the challenges of this continent. And then the third thing I want you to read is the first chapter, because it tells a story. And to me, AI is not just a tool, there's a story behind it. And if you understand the story, you start understanding what you can do with AI. So it takes you on my journey into AI or key moments in that journey. And those include a conference at Wits University in 2018 where I gave a talk on AI and where it was likely to go. On my panel was Dr. Rosman, as well as a guy by the name of Adam Pantanovitz, who today heads up the Wits Innovation Hub. And it was an incredible panel. It was incredibly exciting and inspiring because it was obvious for everyone participating and attending that AI was going to be massive in the future. And a comment I made in that panel was that it's very clear a wave is going to break. We don't know how big or what it'll look like, but it was very obvious from all the AI startups and all the investment going into AI back in 2018 that something big was going to happen.
And are we ready as a country for the wave? Because it's here now, right?
Yes,
the wave.
yes, exactly.
Are we ready to
Of
go
course,
where it takes
we've
us?
been part of that wave. That's the big story. The other, I then tell about two trips that I made in that first chapter. I talk about a trip to a soccer stadium in Barcelona, not the Nou Camp, the second stadium called Espanyol. Well, the club is called Espanyol. But there they used that stadium, which is far more sophisticated, believe it or not, than the Nou Camp. They're actually busy renovating the Nou Camp to try and bring it into the 21st century.
Right.
Espanyol had a 21st century stadium, and the La Liga, the Spanish soccer league, used that to showcase the technology that La Liga was using to enhance the experience for fans, for broadcasters, and for coaches as well. So at every level, from players to coaches to broadcasters and commentators to the audiences in the stadium and at home, they were using technology to enhance that experience and to make the league more competitive. And why I love that story is because I then correlated that with how Spain had performed in club football in Europe and discovered that more than half of the teams making the last four of the three major European tournaments, in other words, the semi-finalists, more than half were from Spain. And twice as many clubs from Spain as from England, which has the English Premier League, which is supposed to be the most competitive in the world. And yet Spain was outperforming them by a ratio of 2-1 through the 2010s.
Right.
So this is the 2010s. And I said at the time that once everyone catches up to the technology, it'll no longer be a differentiator. And today everyone has caught up, and it isn't a differentiator anymore. But back then, it was one of the secrets to Spain's success in club football in Europe. At least that's my argument. And you can't really show me evidence to contradict that argument. Or you can. If you do, I'll
bring it forward.
I'd be happy to debate it. So that is a fantastic example of AI being used in a football league, for example. And then the other story in that first chapter talks about the World Bee Project and how a company called Oracle is using AI to analyze the language of bees or what bees are communicating. And I won't go into detail, it's a long story, but it's one of my all-time favorite stories about how AI is helping to save the world.
And lastly, we're almost out of time, and we're not going to give away everything that's in the book because people should buy the book, right?
Definitely.
So that they can actually pay you for your insight and everything else. You made very good predictions about half a decade or so ago about what was coming, right? Where to next with AI, especially in our context, South Africa and the rest of the African continent?
So I'll just go back again 6 or 7 years to put that in context. 2017, I attended a conference in Las Vegas, and what happens in Vegas no longer stays in Vegas because I write about it. And it was Amazon Web Services at that conference, the annual reInvent conference. They unveiled 22 AI tools. And of those tools, there were 5 that were, to me, just so groundbreaking, they were going to change the world. And I wrote in my column in the Sunday Times that Sunday that this glimpse of the future had the audience gasping. It really did. I've seldom been to a conference where the audience was so astonished by what they saw. And I wrote that, and I wrote about 5 specific tools, and I said they sound like science fiction, but within 5 years, they're going to be mainstream. And by pure luck and coincidence, exactly 5 years later, ChatGPT was launched.
Wow.
So among those tools was Amazon Translate, which uses AI to translate any language. Amazon Transcribe, which transcribes your voice into text, which is now a standard tool that you get from a number of people and on any Samsung phone. And now I think Honor phones also have that. So AI translating what you are saying live or transcribing it live goes back to that 2017 conference. And there were a number of others. And one of them was Recognition with a K, which analyzes video footage or live video streams and identifies people in those streams. So if police, for example, are looking for a wanted person, they can simply have these cameras doing surveillance.
And they're using that thing in Asia, hey, at the moment for security purposes, am I right?
Yeah, they use it in China. They were using it in the UK as an experimental tool and in various other places. The problem with it is it's only as good as the data on which it's trained. And what was happening was that they trained the data on white faces.
Oh, dear.
So whites were recognized with about a 90% accuracy rate. People of color, maybe 50%, which is disastrous because it means you have 1 in 2 chance of being
You have a huge
nailed.
section that you don't recognize.
Yeah, or you are arrested because of a 50-50 chance that you might be a criminal. And it resulted in a public relations disaster, massive backlash. But the technology itself is quite incredible, and it will help lead to self-driving cars, among other things, because it's a similar technology that's used. Computer vision is the basis of it. And computer vision means your computer or your phone can recognize anything you're looking at. And we can see in the very near future, you're going to use your phone and point it at anything, and the phone will tell you what it is and maybe where you are as well, based on what you are looking at through your phone.
I mean, it's mind-blowing. Friends of mine and I were talking about phones, right? It was unimaginable, 10, 15 years ago, that I'd be able to unlock my phone through facial recognition.
Exactly, that's
and
part
now
of
it's
that
a norm.
technology.
It's one of the basic bits of technology that come with cell
Exactly,
phones
it's so
now.
ordinary, and yet it's a very advanced form of AI that's being used.
Lastly, Arthur, I want to ask you, you've covered a lot over the decades in terms of technology and artificial intelligence. What excites you now? What are you looking forward to most in terms of things that are either in the pipeline or things that you think are actually going to be rolled out at some point, maybe in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I'm already excited about what these large language models can do in my research work. So right now, we will do a big research project. We'll interview a lot of people. We'll have a big database in an Excel spreadsheet. We've got to turn that into graphs. We have to analyze the graphs. And then we have to write an in-depth strategic analysis of that, and then our conclusions and recommendations. What AI can do now is it can take the Excel spreadsheet and turn it into graphs very badly. So we still do that manually. But what it can then do, it can take the graphs and it can analyze the graphs for us and give us a text analysis of it. We then go through that, fix it up, add our strategic insights. But it's like 50 graphs, each with a page of analysis. That's a lot to work through. We then give that back to ChatGPT, paid version of ChatGPT. So the public, it doesn't get incorporated into their data.
So the one we're on.
Ring-fest, yeah. So, and we say, please sum this all up and tell us what are the most important findings. It will then reference what's out there in terms of the most important findings, but it'll keep it private to us. And then it'll even spit out a bunch of recommendations. And there we have the raw material that we edit and work on. And it's cut down the time to do analysis of a project from 2 weeks to 2 days. Eventually it could be 2 hours. But the difference is we still want humans, we still want us overseeing it. So we're not going to hand it.
Because you can't remove us from the equation.
Yeah, you could. But you would you'd then get very average work. We don't average mediocre work. But you could potentially do a project like that. Once you get the data set, you could potentially do it in 2 minutes if you allow the AI to take it over. That excites me, what it makes possible. But what I'm most excited about is the idea that within the next few years, whatever your area of activity is, whether it's your profession or your hobby or touring, whatever, on your phone, you will have an AI guide, not like an assistant like Google Assistant or Siri or Celia on your Huawei phone or one of those, but an actual tailor-made personal guide that you can ask anything relating to what you're planning to do, what you're currently doing. And one of the examples I like to give is you're about to cross a road and your AI guide says to you, wait a minute, according to my data, people crossing the road at this point have a 30% chance of being hit by a vehicle.
Oh, that's
because
impressive.
You can't see the cars coming around the corner.
Because they're on a bend, maybe.
Yeah, go down the road and cross at the lights, which you should do anyway. But it's an example of what a truly intelligent AI guide that has access to all the information, public information in the world and all the data in the world can then bring down to your personal situation. More down-to-earth examples or everyday examples is every school kid will have a tutor, an AI assistant or AI guide that's actually a tutor that assists them in their homework. Not doing it for them, but guides them in how to solve a problem, how to learn better, how to improve their performance. Teachers themselves will have an AI guide that helps them not just teach better, deliver better lessons, but also help them to guide each student on an individual basis, personalizing education. And that's what AI makes possible. And between those possibilities I've mentioned, you can just use your imagination to extrapolate into any number of possible futures.
The possibilities are endless. Arthur, thank you so much. It's been really good to speak to you. There was Arthur Goldstuck, the founder of Worldwide Worx, as well as editor of Gadget, a magazine. He's also the author of 20 books in this space. Thank you for watching AI Impact Talk. See you soon.